Good evening. Just a few quick announcements. And one of those, I would love for those of you who chose the back row, you're always that person in school. I want you to everybody move forward so that when photos are taken, we give the impression that this was a full house. So move on up, move on up, move up, fill on in. Yes, I know there are signs on the chairs. If you would please move on up and fill in. The storms cause some people to not want to deal with the rain. So those of you who made it, we are grateful that you are here. My name is Carol Daniel, by the way, the host of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. And thank you so much for coming to this historic event. Just a few other details. This will be live on YouTube. We are starting at 7 o'clock. And we are intending to go an hour or more. So if you have anything to do, you can't leave. You are here. We've locked the doors behind you. There's plenty of food. There's a bar. So where do you need to go? Thank you so much for moving up. There will be two sections for questions and answers. We will end the hour with questions. This is Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. When I think about the critical issues facing Black and Brown residents in the St. Louis area, I often ask the questions: how did we get here? What's holding us back? And how do we progress? At 9 PBS, we want to deepen our understanding and change the narrative. Join me as I look for answers and discover solutions on today's podcast.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough.
Good evening, and thank you for watching this very first Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel live special right here on 9 PBS. We are live. Today, we reflect on the 10-year anniversary of the protests that took place in Ferguson, Missouri after the death of Michael Brown Jr. So where do we stand today? What has changed and what still needs to be addressed? Are there lessons we learned or scars that are still healing? I am joined tonight by several guests who will share their perspectives and this live studio audience who I said, let them know you're live. On cue. They will have a chance to weigh in as well. And we are live on YouTube, and you can comment or post a question there as well, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. My first guest is the mayor of Ferguson, a 40-year resident of the city, a former city councilman who, when elected in 2020, became the first African-American and first woman to lead the city. Welcome to Mayor Ella M. Jones.
Thank you. Thank you. It's exciting to be here tonight.
It is always good to talk to you and always good to get your perspective. Take me back to when you decided to run for mayor of Ferguson. You had the winds of change at your back.
I decided to run for mayor because the political organization, I need to go back.
Go on back. We're going back.
I need to go back. During the Michael Brown protests, a group of African-American leaders came to me, and we sat down and we talked, simply because my husband was the political person in the family, and they noticed me following him around. So they immediately came to me, and Mayor Sharon Pace was one of them, and several of them. I'm not going to mention their name. And they asked me to consider running for the Ferguson City Council. And I deliberated a lot because I was running a successful business, pastoring a church, living a good life. But now I had to take inventory and see what I needed to do for my community, because my community has been good to me. It was time for me to pay back. So I resigned my position and I ran for the Ferguson City Council and I won the race. So let's fast forward to 2017. When we met again with the leaders, and they told me in 2017, we would like for you to run for mayor. But there's a strong possibility you may not win. However, let's take the lessons that are going to be taught and use them for 2020. And so I did not win. I learned and moved on to 2020, applied what I had learned. And in 2020, I won the race to be mayor of Ferguson. So I tell everyone the chair that I sit in is not Ella Jones. You don't see the people who support me. And I share that with everyone because I am a connector. And whenever something comes in up in a city and I need to address, I immediately go to one of those supporters. So they are the ones that help me to stay in that position and mentor me while I'm there to move, hopefully, to another position.
What did you learn that you used then to win?
What I learned is that people are not interested in how much you know. They're interested in how much you care.
Mm.
And doing that, yes, you could knock on a door and ask people, tell me, what do you want to see change in your city? They will begin to explain to you what they really would like to have change in the city. We all have potholes, we all have speeders, but the fact that you take time to sit and talk to people, that makes a difference. So the experience of a pastor came in when I was knocking doors, and you cannot let everyone control you. This is a position that you cannot live your life by committee. You must understand your path. You must understand why you are called, and you must have a sense of worth. You got to know who you are and whose you are
Mhm.
in order to be a leader in Ferguson. I don't know about any place else.
So, Mayor Jones, one thing that you and I have talked a great deal about in terms of the change that has happened in Ferguson is the entrepreneurial spirit and the number of businesses that have been established. How many now in the last 10 years, if you can say, and what accounts for that? How has that happened?
Well, since 2014, we have 126 new businesses in Ferguson.
126.
126. And most of them are entrepreneurs. South Florissant Road, we have a lot of new businesses. My thing is, yes, we have 126 new businesses, but how many of them owns the property?
That's a different question.
That's my question.
Is that answer zero?
One or two. Most of the new businesses are renting property. That bothers me simply because we own less property now than our great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers did. So yes, the businesses are thriving. However, I would love to see them own their own property. We have two. Elicious owned their property. Andrea Hoosman, she owns
A realtor.
Yeah,
Mhm.
realtor. She owns her property. And then we have that's on my heart. That's on my heart because I would like to see us own more property.
What is the greatest challenge now, 10 years after Ferguson was ablaze?
The greatest challenge that we have right now is communication.
In what way?
And when I say communication, take, for example, the federal government gave each municipality American Rescue Funds. Ferguson was allocated $4.1 million. Out of the $4.1 million, $650,000 were given to a nonprofit to administer for the community to get exterior housing done, trees cut. And in that process, no communication had been taken place. And we found ourselves at a point where people were complaining that their applications were not being processed in a timely manner, and they did not understand why they were being rejected. So I applied. I said, okay, you all telling me all this going on, so let me apply.
So the mayor of Ferguson applied for some of this money.
I applied,
Mhm.
and I shared this with them. I did not need new windows in my garage, but I put new windows in my garage just to test the system. And I found out what was wrong.
What was wrong?
No communication, none whatsoever. So a group of citizens got together and they started communicating with the nonprofit. What are you doing? How much are you spending? When are you spending? Trying to figure out what's going on. So after 3 months of arguing back and forth, they decided they're going to sit down and talk. And they sat down last week and discussed what were the criteria of the project in order to get the funding and why people were not getting the funding. And when they realized that all of them was basically on the same page, but nobody wanted to give. And when they decided to give and stop talking about racial issues and they sat down and talked, they began to realize that if we don't talk to one another, we're going to be like the children of Israel, 40 years. 40
Walking
years,
around.
walking around. So
Complaining.
they decided we're going to start communicating with each other. And I told them that's when win-win happened. When people realize that they can achieve a common goal, we have win-win.
So $600,000, which was allotted almost 10 years ago.
No, the ARPA funding came out.
ARPA funding, okay.
Because of the pandemic. And the federal government gives you into December 2024 to obligate those funds, and they must be spent by 2026. If a municipality or a city does not spend those funds by then, those funds must go back to the federal government. And the goal is not to send the
anything
money
back.
back to the federal government.
Ferguson Mayor Ella Jones, thank you so much for joining us to talk about lessons or scars. Are there scars?
Of course there are scars. That's the way of life. Life is a process, and you're going to fall down, but you have to determine how long it's going to take you to get up and brush yourself off. And that's what Ferguson is in the process of. We have a consent decree. And within this consent decree, we must follow what the Department of Justice and Ferguson agreed upon. And when we don't follow, we fall down. And sometimes we stay down. 5 police chiefs in order to get to one to pick us up.
Ferguson Mayor Ella Jones, thank you so much. Always good to have you.
Thank you.
Well, all too often, individuals are dehumanized or misrepresented in the media, and in this case, it was Michael Brown Jr. We spoke to his father, Michael Brown Sr., to hear what he wants us to know about his son.
We saw the headlines where people tried to decide who Mike was, and I'm wondering, would you all want the world to know who he was?
I really want the world to know that he was loved. His family loved him. He was a human. It's in the demonized, right? He was a human. He wasn't a robot. You know, this is real life for us. You know, he loved his siblings. He loved his grandma. He loved a lot of things. He loved women, you know, girls. You know, he was a young man. You know, people seem to forget and that he was, you know, someone's child. You know, he had a bright future. You know, the tables can turn, and then you know they bring things and they start trying to shed different light. You know, so we definitely want people to know that he was my son, and I loved him, you know, and just building character, you know, because he didn't have a character anymore. You know, it was just this happened and that was done.
Everyone in the community was impacted by the protests, the looting, the images coming out of West Florissant night after night. Residents told me about the smell of tear gas inside their homes and the sound of helicopters overhead night after night. Protesters talked about the difference between the calmer daytime activity and the more chaotic nighttime behavior. The raw emotions of those who stood against what they believed to be systemic inequity and those who stood with law enforcement equipped in riot gear were on display for the world to see. Well, joining me now is a Ferguson business owner and longtime resident of Florissant, Bryant K. Mitchell, owner of BKM Fitness. Thank you for coming. And Dr. Twyla Baylor, a resident of 40 years. She is a minister and an educator. Dr. Baylor, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
And before it's all said and done, I think I'm going to have a membership to BKM Fitness. I think that has to happen, right? Yeah. Dr. Baylor, let me start with you because you live in the home that your parents bought in Ferguson, correct?
That is correct. 40 years, 1980. We relocated from St. Louis City to St. Louis County. My father, Elder Willie George Baylor, bought a home with my mom, who's just turned 90 this year.
And she is here?
She's here with us this evening. And that is the home that I live in to this day. I am a longtime Ferguson resident. I've seen Ferguson transition over the years, but one thing I can say, Ferguson is strong and will always be strong.
Then and now for Ferguson, how has it changed in these last 2 years? 10 years, rather.
It's changed. The strength of Ferguson is still there. But the residue of what happened to Michael Brown Jr. is still in the air. Although we are moving on, we're moving forward with our leadership, Mayor Ella Jones and her committee, everyone that works with her, there's still some residue of that moment that is still lingering in the air of Ferguson. When you travel abroad, and they know that you are from Ferguson, the first thing they point to is Michael Brown Jr. And I want them to know that although that was a very horrific time in our life in Ferguson, and I've had the opportunity to meet his mom and speak with his mom, and she was a lovely lady, I must say this, Ferguson is stronger, we're better, and we're coming up. We have a lot of work to do. We're not there yet, but we are coming back. And I believe with continued strong leadership and the resiliency of our community, we will build back better than where we were.
BKM Fitness has been in Ferguson for 10 years. But it wasn't always easy. It wasn't easy to even get started in Ferguson.
No, it wasn't. When we moved in May. My son had just graduated. Our son had just graduated from college, from UCM, and we moved him the same day we moved into our gym. And then, the unfortunate incident when Michael Brown was killed happened in August. I was in Jamestown Mall. I was the last business in Jamestown Mall. Right. Yeah.
That's trivia. That's trivia.
Yes. We were the last one. And I'm searching, okay, what are we going to do with all these people? What I'm going to do. And we found the spot. Harold, it took us 4 months to get a permit to tear down 4 walls in the building. 4 months. 4 months. I went to these people, I go, I'm opening a gym. I'm not opening a liquor store, a nightclub. I'm opening a gym, health and fitness. I'm college educated. I went in and talked to these people, the then administration. I felt humiliated, but I gave it right back to him. I had to tell one guy, I said, he goes, well, we know who you are. We did our little background check on you. We know you have good credit. I kid you not. We know you have good credit. You know, everything about you is clean and whole 9 yards. I said, well, you don't have more education than you? I have never bragged about that because I didn't get my college degree until I was 37 years old.
Well, all right.
By the grace of God. But how dare you trying to humiliate me like that? When we moved in, we were harassed by the police so much.
Describe that.
Oh, you don't want to know. You have an 8-second delay button. Some of the things that were said to my family, to my friends. We didn't have we don't have a dock or anywhere to load or unload. We had to build. We had to take equipment in, take equipment out, take trash out, and whole 9 yards. And the police would come by and would totally harass. You have to move this so-and-so car. You need to move this truck. You need to get out of the way right now. You can't cross the street here. You must go to the end of the corner. And I reached out to, we had 2 members of the gym who were police officers, and they were sergeants. Harry Dillworth is one of them. I called Harry, I said, Harry, man, would you please tell these people, leave us alone? And he did. He did. It was traumatic. It was very traumatic. And, you know, I've experienced racism when I was 13 years old, but to see it in a level where I'm a business owner, I'm investing in this community. I could have taken my gym anywhere, but I chose to do it right there in Ferguson. The Lord led me because I'm telling you, when we were in Jamestown, I had nowhere to go. I said, okay, God, where would you want us to go? And we ended up in Ferguson and not knowing the seed, everything that we would do for the community.
My understanding is that you have the mayor's number, that the current mayor who was just with us, that you talked to her, she helps you. How does she help you?
Well, you know, when the whole incident went down in Ferguson, it was so traumatic. I walked up out of my gym, the smell, just debris everywhere, glass, people driving through. Never seen so much traffic before in Ferguson. Never, ever. And I was heartbroken. This is my community. What can we do? What can we do? The then mayor was across the street with national media. Not one time stepped in my gym and asked for anything. Not one time stepped in and said, what can we do to help? And I think that's part of the problem. Once Ms. Jones was elected, I've called her several times. I've texted her several times. Not one time has she said no to me. Not one time.
Or ignored you.
Or ignored me.
Yeah.
Even we park on a public parking lot. I love my people. I love my clients. If there's ice out there, I go out there sometimes just throw ice out myself. It's a big, huge parking lot, 100 people, 100 plus people, 200 people. And I didn't think it was plowed good enough. A good friend of mine who was here, her husband plowed it. And I said, you know what, more needs to be done. I called City Hall, they wouldn't do it. I called Ms. Jones, she had it done right away. Mm. That's what was missing then that we have now. This woman has never, and I'm one of those, Ms. Jones, I'm one of those who pay $4,500 a month in rent. I'm looking to buy.
You are one of the, that she talked about. You don't own the building.
I've been looking for 4 years. I don't have a lease. I'm not going to sign another lease. I want to stay in Ferguson. You know, I would love to stay in Ferguson, continue living my legacy, continue making people healthy and fit. You know, a moment that really touched me, I have several that stand out. This was one. Michael Brown's mom came to my gym to work out. I told each and every one of my clients, do not treat her like a celebrity. You better not go up and ask for a picture, put you out, and I'll embarrass you. Oh. Hey, that's, you know, because I want her to feel comfortable.
Right.
She came up to me. I promised my wife I wouldn't cry. She came up to me and she said, thank you for making Ferguson look good. Mm. Our slogan on the back of our shirts, you will survive. So during the uprising. We're running up and down Florissant Road, and people blow horns and say, "Hey, thank you so much. Thank you." Just, fist pump. And it is amazing that our message is a universal one. You will survive.
Twyla, you and I talked about what you were doing at that time,
Mhm.
a second grade teacher
Mhm.
in SLPS, St. Louis Public Schools. So you would
Correct.
leave Ferguson, go to SLPS, and then have to come back
Mhm.
every day.
Yes.
And when we talk about trauma, just that simple trip became rather difficult.
Yes.
In what way?
Um, it was, thinking about it, it was leaving out 7:30 in the morning, and I would see the residents cleaning up Ferguson and the corridor where they were protesting. And then in the evenings, I would have to, before I came to my home, I would have to make sure I did all of my errands because the back part of Ferguson, some back parts of Ferguson were shut off. The West Florissant corridor at one point was being manned by state troopers. And I remember having to take out my driver's license and show them I actually do live up in this subdivision. And to get in, and I was stunned because I'm like, I thought I was living in some type of bad movie. And when we got in at night, my mom can attest to this, we were in that night
You
because
couldn't
it
leave.
was so much going on. And again, this went on for quite a while.
How worried were you about your mother, who was 80 at the time?
My
the
mom
truth.
is my mom is a church woman, but you better not mess with her. But I was concerned. I was concerned about my mom. Just to give you a quick little example, before the verdict had come down, that last verdict, we made the decision to leave our home, and we left. We locked up everything, and we went and stayed with my brother in Hazelwood, Missouri, because we just didn't know what was going to happen. I just couldn't believe we had to do that. But for my safety and my mom's safety, I thought that was best. It was concerning. I have family members that live in Ferguson. I had an aunt who lives in Ferguson now, a street over from us. There was a bullet shot through her house during that week. She didn't know it until they found the shell on the floor. We don't know where it came from or how it happened. So there was so many different things going on. You just didn't know. So it was a little interesting.
Can I ask you both before we move on, have you healed?
I'm getting there.
You're getting there,
I'm
Brian.
getting there.
Dr. Baylor?
I'm getting there. It's a process. It is a process. Not there yet, but we're getting there.
Sign me up. Sign me up, Brian.
Thanks, girl.
Thank you so much. BKM Fitness and Dr. Twyla Baylor, thank you so much. Brian, thank you. Well, over the years, we have heard from many voices about the needs facing residents of Ferguson and more broadly, the majority African-American communities in North St. Louis County. But what was the impact of the protests and the riots on the children who are now young adults? 9 PBS producer Leah Gullett brings more on Youth Voices.
The uprising after the shooting death of Mike Brown impacted people across the country, but especially those in North St. Louis County. Over the years, we've heard from city officials, business owners, and activists, but what about the children whose lives were interrupted by the event? We spoke with a few individuals from Dellwood, Ferguson, Normandy, and other North St. Louis towns to revisit the unrest that happened 10 years ago.
I was 10 when the Michael Brown situation happened.
I was 9, actually, when Ferguson was going on.
I was like 8 when it happened. I lived in Ferguson my entire life. I remember like my mother being sad and the community being in an outroar and us having to go stay with family for a while because she didn't want me to be in that environment at such a young age and harbor any hate or resentment in my heart.
I remember standing in front of the TV just watching the news. It was just like, all this commotion, we're destroying. And I literally asked my grandmother one day, I was like, well, why do they keep destroying these places?
Yeah.
When these are places that we go to, places that we need. And then when we don't have it, we're all gonna say, okay, we don't have these things.
I do remember there was a newspaper in our living room, and I remember just reading it and being horrified because I couldn't really comprehend like this was still happening. This happened like not that far away from me.
I remember I was in my room with my grandmother and I asked her, I was like, Granny, what is going on? We were watching CNN, we were watching Fox 2 News, we were watching all the local stations. And I remember asking myself the question, what could I do at such a young age to make sure that this had to stop?
And I think Ferguson really sparked that for us. And it really lit a fire in young people to take a stand and, to stand up for something.
While riding through downtown Ferguson, we stopped by Kathy's kitchen to speak to the youngest daughter of the owners.
So, if I remember correctly, we might have been out of school for a little bit when some of the riots was going on. I remember they had it was called the Hub. It was like a student center. It was like, if y'all feel uncomfortable or something y'all want to talk about, y'all can come down here and talk about it. So a lot of people was talking about it, but it was a very passionate situation. So that escalated from them talking about it to them leaving to go march. There was no repercussions for that. Like they understood, how everybody felt, how sensitive the situation was, and they let them go. And then once everybody was able to protest, we just went back to school like normal. There was no repercussions for doing what you felt like was the right thing. After watching the unrest from afar, a superintendent from North Carolina moved to Ferguson to become the new superintendent for the Ferguson-Florissant School District.
But those first years I got here, there were a lot of folks who, when the schools shut down, they would have school at the libraries and school in different parts of the community. And so there was an aura of unsafety and potential unrest that would happen if we didn't do some things. So I think it was important for us, me in particular, my role, to put structures in place so teachers felt safe, so that students felt safe, and more importantly, families feel safe being able to go outside and sit on their front porch at night.
I think coming up on the 10-year anniversary of Ferguson, the thing that is utmost importance for the year of 2024 is really educating yourself in voting. Who is coming up in these upcoming elections, and what's really going on, and all the policies and things that are at risk, and then going out and voting.
Different pockets of St. Louis got different stuff going on, but as far as Ferguson, we're moving in the right direction. It's nice to see that the business and the things in this neighborhood is starting to look like the people that actually live here.
It is a great community. And often what happens in the media or how they sometimes portray and they show what they see. It gives a negative image of our community. It's nothing like that. We had 2 of our schools that were named to the U.S. News and World Report best schools in the country, right here in Ferguson. So I'll tell people wherever I go that I live in Ferguson. And while I'm not from here, I never will be. This is home for me. And I am proud to be here.
And as promised, we want to take some questions from our live studio audience. If you could just say your first name and go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gerald. I'm with the Heartland Black Chamber of Commerce. I wanted to ask this question for the mayor. I appreciated what I heard. I have 2 questions. I did actually eat lunch in Ferguson today at that one beautiful restaurant you talked about. One thing I want to know, as a city, what are you doing to help the business individuals own their property? Is there any steps you're taking to help them in that respect? And 2, what I remember about Ferguson was the statistics from the police department. The fact that you had such a large minority population and it just was unbelievable that they were not represented in City Hall. How much of that has changed over these last 10 years? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And Mayor, if you want to step to that mic, and Brian, if she can answer as well as you, what is being done, and you can crowd that mic, Brian, but Mayor Jones?
First of all, during the unrest, we have an economic development department. And what we did, we gave most of the businesses who applied for grants, we gave them funding. However, the property in Ferguson is locked, and you understand what I'm saying. The property is locked. So we are going to have to find another way to get these properties to the point where people can buy them. Right now, they are locked. And I say that because we have a lot of people who want to purchase buildings, but they are locked.
What does that mean? They're locked.
Ferguson has 52% renters, 48% homeowners. And we have a masses of LLCs who have come in to Ferguson and bought up all these properties.
Okay.
People have to understand there's a timeline. In 2010, it was 2,257 residents in the city of Ferguson. During the time of Michael Brown, which is 2014, we had a mass exodus. And within that exodus, LLCs came in and bought everything that was standing. So that's what I mean about the property being locked. And as far as the police department, right now, when Chief Troy Doyle took over the police department, it was 49% of officers there, of staffing. Now we add 76% of staffing. And only 4 of the police who were there in 2014 remain on the staff now. So it has done a tremendous turn. And out of that 76%, we have more women who are officers. And it's a big difference. Chief Troy has made a tremendous difference in the Ferguson Police Department. He has hired what the consent decree has been demanding, a training officer. He came in, he looked at the consent decree, and he started working. And at the rate of the work and the staff that he has put in place, we should be in compliance within 2 years. And
Thank
that's
you.
a big difference. A big difference.
Thank you, Mayor Jones.
So different police department.
Thank you so much. Earlier this summer, I had a conversation with Reverend Starsky Wilson, who is now the CEO of the Children's Defense Fund. During the uprising, he was then the CEO of the Deaconess Foundation and was appointed by then Governor Jay Nixon to co-chair the Ferguson Commission. Here's a snippet of our conversation. Tell me if you left here with scars or you left here with lessons from the Ferguson uprising.
Yeah, so I left St. Louis in December I started at the Children's Defense Fund December 7th, 2020, and I left with both lessons and scars. My prayer is that I get to work now from my lessons, get to work from my scars and not from my wounds. The reality is we always can pick up things. I learned things about policy. I learned things about power building in the context of the uprising. I tell people a lot, I was dramatically and deeply radicalized by young people in that moment. And I take all of that with me into the service to Children's Defense Fund and everything else I do. I took that into the work that I did at Deaconess Foundation. So yeah, I absolutely leave with those lessons, and I leave hopefully with scars. I think I was here long enough to do work, to learn on one side, to build enough relationships and trust to be able to do hopefully some valuable work in the midst of the uprising, to learn enough in that context, to then be able to also serve in a way that was helpful, but not to jump out of community immediately following. So when I say that I leave with scars versus wounds, wounds are open many times, and we've not yet healed from them. Scars remind us of where those wounds have been, but they have had some time to heal. And so I had some time to heal after that. Had some time to work with people to rebuild and build some things that the community needed before, and I carry it with me, both the relationships and the lessons at every turn.
Well, the work of the Ferguson Commission was designed to lay out a path toward positive change. That led to the creation of the 501c3 organization Forward Through Ferguson. Joining me now is the Executive Director, Anissa McCaskill. Anissa, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And my last guest, a woman who became well known during the time of the unrest in Ferguson, the former senior pastor of Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri. She was among the many spiritual leaders who led several prayer vigils, the first of which reportedly took place in the Ferguson Police Department parking lot shortly after Michael Brown was killed. She is now the CEO of Hope Builds LLC, and she is fresh off a plane from Rwanda. Reverend Tracy Blackman made it back to St. Louis. Thank you so much. Anissa, let me start with you. Forward Through Ferguson believes, according to the website, that one day St. Louis can be a region that achieves racial equity. Where do you stand in achieving that very large goal?
I think that it's an ongoing process, right? So we're talking about generational structures that have oppressed individuals, not just in North St. Louis, but throughout the region. But Ferguson brought to light how isolated that community was. So it's an ongoing process. And while we can say that progress has been made, we are talking about a generational shift that has to occur. And that doesn't happen in 10 years. It has to be ongoing. It has to be a confrontation of the structures that allowed for Michael's murder to occur. And then the outrage that occurred. We know that Ferguson could have happened anywhere, but it happened in our backyard. And it was as the result of the systems that were in place. We've heard Mayor Jones and we've heard Michael talk about, David talk about all the different things that they encountered coming into trying to make change in the community. But what I say is what we envision is that it doesn't take someone having Mayor Jones's personal phone number in order for them to be treated fairly.
Right.
And so unfortunately, we're still in that place where we have to have an in, whether we know a police officer, whether we know the mayor or our alders, to be treated fairly and as we should by our neighbors.
There's a sentence on the website that says, we expect that as we travel, the path will change and we'll find ourselves navigating places we couldn't have imagined. Is that where we are now?
I think we are there right now. People want an easy answer and say, okay, it's been 10 years, what have you done? But the Ferguson Commission had 189 calls to action. And there are different organizations within the community that are doing that work. But unfortunately, because they are not a known organization or a mainstream organization, they often don't get funding, they often don't get support. So who then assists them and draws to light the work that is being done day in and day out and has been occurring before Michael was murdered, when Michael was murdered, and since Michael was murdered?
Reverend Blackman, what were your immediate prayers, do you remember, during the protests? And what are they now?
Well, first, thank you for having me.
It's so good to see you.
And thank you for doing the work you're doing. My prayer at that time is my prayer now, that our babies might be whole. When Michael Brown was killed, I was not in Ferguson particularly because of that particular death. I say this a lot because I think we forget it. Michael Brown was number 169 to die in St. Louis that year. And 10 days later, Kajimi Powell was killed. And a month later, Von Derek Myers was killed. Michael galvanized the region, I dare say, not because of the killing, but because of the callousness.
Correct.
And some may disagree with me about that. But the fact that he was killed at noon on a Saturday in an intergenerational, multi-class apartment building with young people who actually knew how to use a phone and streamed not the killing, but the way his body was left in the street.
The disrespect.
The disrespect of his body, the disrespect of his family. And everybody who lived in this region could relate to that. And as it streamed, people in other states could relate to it. And I was afraid for our children because people do not know how to deal with Black rage. And our children were hurting. They were grieving, but they were being treated as though they were violent. It wasn't violence, it was rage. And there's a difference in rage and anger. Rage is when there is moral injury, when there's soul injury. I wanted our children to come out of it alive. And so did every other clergy person in the streets. And I'm sure every mother and every father wanted our children to be okay.
Are they okay?
Our children are not okay.
They're not.
No. But our children are resistant and resilient. And so one of the pictures from Ferguson that I keep in my office is not of the protest and it's not of me. There are lots of pictures of that. It's of a little bitty boy whose name I do not know, who lived in Canfield Apartments. And on this day where everybody else was protesting and shouting and using our megaphones and trying to stand up, there was this little boy coloring with colored chalk on the sidewalk. And he reminded me that children have a way of finding joy and finding creativity, even in the worst of circumstances. He is my hope. Our children are not okay anywhere.
Right.
And Ferguson just brought that to light. Sometimes it's hard just to say Ferguson because then it gets located as though there is something in this community that is different.
Right.
But St. Louis is Ferguson.
Right.
Cleveland is Ferguson.
Cleveland is Ferguson.
Houston is Ferguson.
Ferguson is everywhere.
One of the things that I used to get angry about, and I just didn't talk about publicly, is the trauma tourism.
So
people would come from
wait, you
other
said,
states.
Did you say trauma tourism?
Yes.
Would come
Okay.
take pictures.
Yes.
Yeah.
People would come from other states. Some people came to be in solidarity, but lots of people came as though Ferguson was some phenomena.
Right.
And I got tired and I started asking people when they would call and say, will you take us to see Ferguson? I mean, it's a street. Will you take us to see Ferguson? I said, and you live in New York? And you live in DC? You don't have to come all the way here to see Ferguson. You can see it there. And there was a Catholic priest by the name of Father Cribbs. He's retired, and he may not, I mean, he's retired, I think. But a long time ago, he started, are there any Catholics here? The Stations of the Cross that happened during the Holy Season. He started taking the Stations of the Cross out of his church, and he would identify places where the remnants of racism still existed in St. Louis. And he would rent a bus and take his entire congregation to do penance at those places, to repent and have prayer. And so I adapted that for people, for institutions who would call and say, we want you to take us to Ferguson. I said, it's going to take you all day because we're going to go and see places in St. Louis where the remnants are. We're going to go to where the Dred Scott decision was made. We're going to stand on the steps where slaves were auctioned looking at freedom across the river. We're going to go to Bush Stadium, which looks really good now, but used to be the warehouse where slaves were held. We're going to go to where the mounds have been removed so the bridges can be built. And so until you understand the context, then you just look and think this are just angry people who are out of control. They were enraged.
Anissa and Reverend Blackman, we've called this lessons or scars. It is a question, and clearly there are both.
Yeah.
What lessons do you look at today in 2024?
The lessons that we look at in 2024 is that it's very easy for people to reverse. So what we had in 2014 and then in 2020 and all throughout those different instances where Black and brown and men and women have been murdered by authority or just in community is these great statements, right? Where everyone says we stand with community, we stand with diversity, but now what we see is a pulling back of all those things where our priorities have shifted. Those are not things that we are concerning ourselves for, but now more than ever, we are really sitting on the precipice of something happening again, but we're turning a blind eye because we feel that it's not popular anymore. So there's the scar, right? So how do you get past that and really get to true healing when people say that this generational hurt that is embedded in the structure of St. Louis and in this nation is not a priority anymore? What healing can there be as long as we are turning a blind eye and saying, we're not going to give any money? It's not about the money. It's about actually changing the systems that are in place that oppress people. And until we actually have that conversation, you can have all the statements in the world, you can give all the money in the world, but we're going to end up right back where we are, struggling and trying to make decisions that will impact the next generation. My son is 20 years old. He was 10, and he told me last year that we failed him. And he is struggling now how to make sense of how I, as a 52-year-old woman, have had a better trajectory in my career and finances, the ability to hold a home, and even how I move in community than he now is looking at the age of 20. So we have healing, but it's in instances and in personal relationships and in personal connection. And what has to happen is there actually has to be a deconstruction and a reset of the systems that allowed for Michael to be murdered and Trayvon Martin to be murdered and all of the others we can call the role of who has died before Michael and after Michael. And what it all boils down to is that the system is broken. We are in a racist, embedded government and just society. And until we actually make that shift and have that discussion, what healing can we have?
I thought about this moment because you said you wanted me to say something, and I want to talk about the hope too. Mayor Jones always talks about the hope, and I appreciate that from you. I'm usually too pissed off to talk about the hope, but I'm going to talk about the hope today because the hope matters. Some of the hopeful things I see from Ferguson is that the young people who were in the streets learned the power of their voice. Mm-hmm. And they used their voice collectively to make impact, even if they didn't have the money in this region. I directly contribute the election of people like Mayor Jones, mm-hmm. Tashara Jones, mm-hmm. Cori Bush, Wesley Bell, to the work, the grassroots organizing of the young people who were activated in Ferguson. I believe that with all of my heart. Mm-hmm. I believe that the picture, the image of Congress shifted. You may not remember the year when all the women came into Congress. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And not only did they come into Congress, they didn't come in Brooks Brothers suits thinking like they had to look like everybody else. You saw women joining Congress with babies on their hips, with whatever their cultural identity was showing. It was because in Ferguson, we were who we were. And they learned that you can be who you are and be heard. I, as Carol said, just got in a few hours ago from Rwanda. And when I landed in Rwanda, some young lawyers were waiting and said, Reverend Blackman, Ferguson. Mm. all the way across the world. We were there to talk about peace, and they wanted to know how things were going. I find hope in the fact that there were brilliant people in Ferguson, young people who deserved the opportunity to go to some of the best colleges, but would have never been able to because they weren't given access. They didn't have financial access. They didn't have legacy. Let's be clear. They may have been eligible to get in on affirmative action, not because they were Black, but because they were brilliant and needed a door, right? Real affirmative action is legacy admissions, and those haven't gone anywhere. So I want to commend Washington University for paying attention to those students and for identifying students who had leadership and brilliance in them and opening a door for them, going and getting them and giving them an education at Washington University. One of them is finishing law school right now. One of them is getting a PhD in nursing and doing her own work. And I don't know where the other two are, but out of the 5 that I know of, 4 of them graduated. One chose a different track. And they weren't there because of charity. They were there because Washington University took the step to see. I want to commend SLU for when we had the big convening down at the convention center that SLU owns. I can't remember the name of it right now. Thank you. When we were there and the kids took off protesting afterwards and ended up on SLU's campus, SLU modeled what it means to listen to young people, even if you don't understand. They didn't call the police on them. They let them camp out on SLU. Maybe many of you don't remember this. I want to commend the mothers. Many mothers in St. Louis were hurting because we have a way in our society of making celebrities out of the few. And that causes a lot of disagreement and a lot of animosity. It happened with me, but it also happened with mothers. And I noticed that in the middle of the riots, that to lift Leslie up in that moment was what we needed to do. And those mothers wanted to do that. And yet there were mothers out there whose children had been killed in St. Louis and nobody called their names. Nobody protested for them. No media cameras came for them. And so we held a private luncheon for grieving mothers. I want to thank Christian Hospital for opening up their doors and giving me the atrium free, providing the food for that luncheon. We had 250 spaces. It filled up in an hour, and we could not take all the women who had lost children. I want to thank the Black therapists who were not on the state's register to be paid for providing services because they didn't have culturally competent therapists. Black therapists in St. Louis donated and volunteered their time so that our children could have the culturally competent care they need. There's a lot of good in Ferguson. And I hope what we learned about this region is that if we get beyond the color of skin and look at one another's hearts, if we choose to work together and share our resources and our assets, we will be not just what Ferguson should be, but what St. Louis should be, and quite frankly, what America should be.
Well said. Well said. How quick can you be with your question? We're going to take one audience question before we say goodbye.
First of all, I'd like to say that this remembrance of Ferguson of 10 years ago is so important. We have to learn from the things that happened to us. But more so than anything, I think that I was not a resident of Ferguson. I lived in another part of St. Louis. And part of that is I became a spectator to what could be any place that we live. As an African American, I saw the pain of other African Americans. I saw a mother lose her child because he's 18. He's got too much testosterone. He's just having a good time. He's not killing anyone. He's not robbing anyone. But her child laid in the street as though it was an animal. And therefore, I could understand the pain that if I had lost my child, what that meant. But as a spectator, I also saw resilience. I saw resistance. And I also saw something that I never thought I would see, and that is multicultural, multi-generational individuals coming together, because at that moment, I think our young people started to grow up. They saw something that they had never seen. It's Starsky Wilson, Reverend Starsky Wilson always says that Ferguson radicalized him. And what he really is talking about is that he was living a real nice life, he thought. He never thought that just being Black was going to kill him. That's something that he even said, that's what the old people said. That's what those older people said. So he didn't know that. But what I did see after that was, even though in the midst of the loss, we saw individuals rise up. They started to understand that they had a voice, that they started to understand that they could make a difference. And because of that, we have a Mayor, Ella Jones. Also, I think one of the things that came out of Ferguson was the knowledge of how people were living in a community where they're paying their taxes, where they're doing everything that they needed to do. And there were other people who did not live in the community who were basically controlling everything about them. So that's my statement, but here's my question. We are 10 years from that time. And Mayor Jones said something that truly touched me. She said that what has changed is communication. But I'd like to say, in your estimation, have you seen a level of respect that has basically, I'm going to say, bubbled up? It's not totally there, but respect for other individuals that don't look like you, and for those individuals that are in the police department, and also the politicians. What will it take for those young people, because we're leaving this country to our young people. Our children have to be okay.
Anissa?
What do you feel is important that our children need to know, not only about that 10 years ago, but now, when they actually have an opportunity to make this country a change in the place where maybe it's the place they'd like to live?
So Anissa, have you seen an increase in respect? And Reverend Blackman, you can take the other part about children.
I don't know that I can say that I've seen an increase in respect, but I've seen an increase in understanding of structure and systems. And so in understanding how structures and systems work, you then can call truth to power and hold them accountable. And so in terms of what our young people need to do, I think the simple answer is that they need to vote. They need to run for office, and they need to not just consider what happens on the national level, but who is running for school board, who is running for city council, who can Mayor Jones feel comfortable turning Ferguson over to with all the work that she has done. And so there really needs to be that communication, that conversation, and that preparation. So I can't say that the respect has occurred, but I do think that there's an understanding of what needs to happen.
Reverend Blackman?
Thank you for that question. One of the things I've often shared that haunted me then and haunts me now is that when we went out to Ferguson as clergy, I'm going to say when I got there on Sunday and the clergy that came with me to pray at the police station, the streets were already filled with young people who had never gone home from Saturday. There was a shift in Ferguson because in the Black community, clergy lead, but this was not ours to lead. The young people were the leaders. They were already the leaders. And I noticed in that moment that most of them had absolutely no idea who we were. I'm just being honest. And that's bad. But what's worse is that we had no idea who they were. And so for our children, they built the community that they needed in the streets. And I think it's our responsibility to be in the streets with them until we have a community that they want to engage in with us. I don't want to leave this moment and this opportunity without saying the name of Josh Williams, who was arrested because he set a fire in a trash can in Quick Trip after another Black man was killed across the street. And the protesters showed up for every killing. He should not have done that, but Josh was mentally challenged. He found a home in the protest. And immediately after he started the fire, someone came behind him and put it out. He was caught on camera and he was tried. He was given 8 years. It's been 10 years and Josh is still in prison. So when I think about the children, I think about Josh, who was 18 when he set that fire, and he's 28 years old. And he's done more time than anybody else that was involved in anything to do in Ferguson or the deaths that have happened since. So I speak his name in this place.
Thank you. Thank you. Anissa, thank you so much. Reverend Tracy Blackman, it is always an honor
Thank you for
to
having
hear
me,
your voice.
Carol.
Thank you. So glad you made it back safely. And thank you for watching and listening to this inaugural, it won't be the last, live Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. We hope our discussion fosters meaningful conversations and deepens our understanding. We like to say at 9 PBS that we intend to change the narrative. That is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. To listen to more conversations, go to 9pbs.org/Listen St. Louis, or you can search Listen St. Louis on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Thank you so much.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough.